past it.
You're gonna grant me any 3 wishes I want, right?
Almost. There are a few provisos, a couple of quick little quotes.
Like...
Rule number 1, I can't kill anybody.
Yeah, so don't ask.
Rule number 2, I can't make anybody fall in love with anybody else. You little put-em there. Rule number 3,
I can't bring people back from the dead. It's not a pretty picture. I don't like doing it.
other than that, you got it. Proviso.
Welcome back, and I thought I'd start this video with something that is kind of familiar to everybody, and maybe many people in the audience are going to be familiar with. And it's kind of building on what we've been talking about with how sometimes narrowing down ideas from tradition can seem daunting, and how do we even begin to think about, I mean, how do I know what to recognize as something I want to keep, and then something I want to almost maybe narrow down or trim off, and then what do I do with what I have left, to kind of summarize it into something that's easy to digest, as it were. So coming out of tradition, you can think about cinema and theater and entertainment and almost wonder about what we've been watching as we were growing up as children. And if you actually look at it with the lens of tradition now, and maybe something that we might know about history, you may realize that the work has almost already been done for us. Maybe what's expected of us is just to go back and understand some of the narratives or some of the historical happenings, as it were, and then see how time has almost allowed people to narrow things down, almost create not quite a hagiography, because a hagiography is almost a really embellished narrative about a historical figure that almost becomes mythical, that you almost have a hard time believing that the actual person really existed. So if you think about Pirates of the Caribbean, that's basically what we think of the main pirate, as it were. So this is kind of the same idea, where you think, what is it that I can kind of hold on to that is going to help me throughout time, and that no matter what context, it's going to hold true. So we talked about how anything in the world is almost accessible for us to kind of explore and kind of wonder about, why is this in the world, and what can I do to help myself understand how to make use of it in an effective way. So we talked about how Jinn, for example, like we see the genie, and he says, I can grant any wish, but I can't kill anybody. So we already know do not kill means we're trying to promote life. And then he says, I can't help anybody fall in love. So we're not trying to override people's heart intelligence. We talked about how that's almost like the powerhouse, or like the engine that drives everything in our world. And if you think back to that picture I kind of showed, I think in one of the videos, where we think about the heart of the earth, as it were, like the core where the magma is. If we think of our heart relative to that, it's almost like that's basically what we need. That's like basically the life that we thrive on. And then we can't bring anybody back from the dead. So think about why we can't do those. Like basically what it sounds like is we can't play with time. So if you think, I have a person that I am trying to get to know, but I don't know that they are already involved in a relationship, or maybe they're here just for a vacation, and I'm on vacation too, and I don't realize that they already have somebody that is special to them in their heart somewhere else. So how am I supposed to know how to get along with this person, or that they're not even somebody that is almost interested in getting to know somebody else, like in a kind of intimate or like a friendship kind of way? This is new for everybody, I assume, because sometimes it's hard to understand how time and context almost changes these subtle ways of getting to interact with people and understand what their style of love is, or it's called a love language. So if you think about that, with regards to sometimes how cultures and parents almost have a way that's almost like a methodology about how they expect their kids to kind of evolve into a relationship and in a marriage, that is kind of traditional. And sometimes we don't know as parents or children how to kind of outgrow that or step outside of that, and say, why don't we follow our heart? Like, what is it about certain scenarios or certain families maybe that makes some parents a little bit nervous about letting go and just seeing like how their kids kind of step into something that's as formative as love, and that's it's very impactful. Like it's hard to really understand the emotion and how, especially during our teens and adolescent years, like how to really understand how to grasp how to deal with it. So the fact that that's mentioned, that we shouldn't try to manipulate people's hearts, or we shouldn't try to manipulate the way people feel about something, to me reminds me about why maybe in a postmodern age we're kind of drawing back a little bit about how we talk about God, and how we um, try to draw a boundary about what we understand to be important meanings for other people, so that we let them kind of evolve that on their own. Now the other one was he doesn't play with the dead, or he doesn't try to raise anybody from the dead. And that's almost like you can almost think of it as almost similar to killing, because you wonder then, if I'm raising somebody from the dead, it's not quite their time yet to wake up, maybe. So did I just ruin somebody's life who is alive? Like, so is it like, did I really mess up time then? So if you think of that, for example, I know in scripture, and probably before the Quran too, there's mentioned two angels that teach magic, because people, I guess, notice certain trends sometimes, and then they want to understand, like, wow, that's a really curious pattern, and then they want to follow it. And maybe some people get inspired to continue following it, but they also get inspired to be careful, because maybe it's really hard to not almost become attached to this way of living, and you start to want to manipulate things around you and wonder, like, what if I put these two people together, what if I do this? And that's where it's important to remember that we are only responsible for ourselves, and remember that our base aim in life is freedom of expression. So if we're trying to think that we're going to manipulate other people or control them, that should be our first red flag. Like, if that idea is coming to my mind, then I know that it's not a healthy inspiration from an angel that wants to help me in the long term. Because remember, part of having freedom of choice is to be able to know what's a good choice and what's not a good choice. And that's almost to say how God is encouraging us to make use of all the parts of our body. So you have to know how to think, you have to learn how to see what patterns are going to continue if I follow like a suggestion that looks like it's a good one, because how do I know the difference between a jinn that maybe is a believer and looks like an angel, and an angel that's from light, so it's closer to just, I want to worship God in the best way, and I'm just gonna leave it at that. So it almost tells you that even within those realms of existence, there's different hierarchies, there's different levels in there too. So all of this, the more you understand it in depth, the more you understand what I mean by understanding nuance, and why we shouldn't be quick to generalize and say, oh no, it's going to be okay because I can take care of it, or like, I'll be careful, right? It's very important to actually think, is there a different interest for me, or like a different hobby than some of these gray areas, right? So gradually working towards a goal, even if something looks exciting, it's important to read the research before it and see, like in this case, what used to happen when people used to do this in the past, and then you'll know when to stop and maybe to try something else. So and that's basically what it is. And it's kind of scary actually, because sometimes we don't know what creates a friendship bond. And wouldn't it be sad if somehow we were the cause of a friendship breaking apart and we didn't really know it? Like, think of somebody that's really close to your heart, right? And you always hang out together, you go to the mall together, you ride your bikes together, you talk on the phone all the time, and then all of a sudden, for some reason, you're not friends anymore. And you kind of wonder, like, I wonder what happened. And it makes you sad. And sometimes it's like, oh, I miss it because when I was sad, I used to talk to this friend. So thinking of things like that reminds us back about empathy and the spiritual path, and why remembering what our goal is helps us always kind of recenter, or like I talked about last time, like refocus what our goal in life is. So building on also like some of these other stories from Disney, for example, is the story of Sleeping Beauty. So it's almost like, if I am trying to do something or learn something that's new and I don't know if it's safe yet, maybe I can almost pretend that I'm going to go to sleep. So I'm going to say, I wonder if I pretend that I'm not going to eat anything poisonous, because I know that I'm trying to make healthy choices. But what if the choice that I'm making to follow a friend who wants to research something, and I know it's not safe, then what if I pretend that I'm going to go to sleep? and I'm going to say, you know what, let's play this game. And then your imagination can grow, and then your creativity can grow. And then you know that you understand why you are in control of your destiny. Because the more you understand why, for example, God in some scripture tells us to be careful about certain things, it's not so that if we try them or do them by mistake that he wants us to get in trouble. It's just to say, sometimes I am going to kind of sit back, or the universe is going to sit back to let you think through what is it appropriate for you to do right now, and how are you going to know what is an appropriate thing and what is not. So this is something that as adults grow older, they have a lot of trouble wondering about, because they start to think, like, why are we created? And it's sometimes not a very easy answer, depending on what your life looks like. So if you think of these stories that we grew up with, or if you're still a bit younger and you want to know about how to go back in tradition, but you're not really sure how, think of these narratives. For example, Snow White, she was someone who liked to live in the forest, which means sometimes people love to study biology or nature, or take nature walks and take pictures and almost look at the different patterns that happen. How long does it take for some plants to grow? Why do some grow faster than others? And what kind of it talks. Snow White's also something that evolves or revolves around emotions. So you can think about what is it about wanting to become almost like a doctor, and almost wonder, if this plant is sick, what made it sick? Like, is it not getting enough sun? Why are the plant's leaves turning yellow? All these natural curiosities are going to help us remain closer to what the universe is about, which is just natural life, right? And another story is Beauty and the Beast. Sometimes things look scary to us, and we don't know that it's not actually scary. It's just some of the ways that some people have been talking about something, and maybe they don't know because it's just something that's gone through narratives from generation to generation, and people haven't learned enough about it to say that actually it's not really that scary. It's maybe just something that we haven't learned about, and maybe people within the tradition haven't talked about in a way that we can all understand. So because of that, we're all kind of learning at the same time. So think of the story of Prophet Ibrahim that I talked about, and Hinduism. So when I was actually studying, I was studying from with a girl who was from another country, and she was just there to study for a little bit, and then she was going to go back. And she was from that area of the story of Prophet Ibrahim. And so we think that Prophet Ibrahim came from an area of kind of like Eastern Europe. So and she's also from that area. So it was really curious because when we were going through some of the stories about the Indus Valley in India, she was kind of looking at the stories and the pictures that were shown in our textbook, and she's like, I wonder if this was the story of like one of the prophets, because we don't know all the prophets that came in the world. We don't know exactly how many years the earth is, and even in the Quran, like, God doesn't say how many exactly there were. He'll just say there's 25, and there's a lot that we haven't talked about. So you can use your imagination around them. It almost allows you to say, I wonder, and then you can almost imagine what would happen if a person in the past had this kind of miracle. And then your creativity already starts to grow. And then you start to think in like superpowers, and then you can create like animated movies or like comics, and you can just let your imagination run with you, right? There's no limit really. So one of the things that, just talking about Prophet Ibrahim and idols, and how the original story that we read in the Quran could be similar with what happened with Hinduism, is that maybe that is how idols kind of began and how they remained through history. So it might have started as something that's maybe it's not that great, but now that we're understanding how life works and how life continues to survive, even if some of our ideas don't always survive, or we have to kind of upgrade them a little bit, we can almost improve on ideas without making anybody feel bad for having them to begin with. So building on that, if you think, okay, that's true. So if we think of the beast, for example, like sometimes people build, like the story of Ibrahim, if you read it, you're going to see that he actually broke two of the icons of three, I think, almost to say to the people that he was living with, like, if this is God, why isn't it stopping me from hurting it, right? So it's almost a way to help everybody think about what is it that hurts us in life. And it shouldn't be to hurt other people's feelings. But he was feeling that his feelings were hurt because people weren't allowing him to think freely. They almost all wanted to think in the same way. And he felt like that's not very fair. We should all be allowed to think the same if we want to, but if we want to think differently, we should be allowed to do that too. So that's going to go back to courage and how we should help ourselves and help others be able to stand up for themselves if they do start to have a little bit unique ideas, and not to give them such a hard time about it. So going back to movies, this is almost like a great way to begin, because it's just like I have a video recorder, or like my phone, and I just want to go into nature and record things and make up stories, and maybe they'll sound a little bit like some of the movies I've been watching, and why not? And maybe I'll read something in stories, or if I have parents that read scripture and some of the stories overlap and they help teach me some lessons about God or the universe or nature, I can put them all together and kind of make them all sound like they are intertwined and they all make sense. So thinking in this way allows us to take ownership of our meaning in a new way that doesn't make us feel like we're not going to be a part of popular culture, but also allows us to know what kind of discussion is sometimes uncomfortable for people, because it's not necessarily always clear. Like I know sometimes when I was, I think probably in university, I started to understand the first time I went back to university, I think 6 years after the first time I dropped out. And the second time around, I had almost internalized some kind of meaning that talking about God relentlessly kind of becomes kind of cliche. And I couldn't figure out what it was. It was almost like if you don't have a group of people who just generally bring the topic in conversation naturally, it's not really something that people always want to talk about. They'll sometimes talk about the universe, or they'll talk about something that's frustrating them, and they don't really know how to integrate it in a kind of like holistic way that's cause and effect, and then I'm okay with it. So because this is something that's new, always thinking about different ways and listening to the way different people talk about things like this is helpful in allowing yourself to think more creatively. Because I think I want to make this point kind of important and emphasized, because if people feel shy about talking about God and they feel like they might get it wrong, and you think like, and you maybe know a lot about it because you have a family that knows a lot about it, they might feel like, oh, maybe I shouldn't, and then they'll give up, which is really sad, right? Because it's hard to say what God is really. It's just a lot of wonderful ideas about the universe and how patterns work in the world, and how in the end God tries to be fair with everybody. And it's difficult to know what's going to be fair for one person that might not look like it's fair to another person, but it actually is, because we don't know how to understand what time is for one person and the way it might look like for another person. So just something to keep in mind. I love that as I kind of gradually go through these videos, I can bring popular culture and entertainment into the narrative, because as I mentioned, sometimes with religion, it gets really heavy on doctrine and theory, and it's hard to almost tie it back into entertainment and just lighthearted fun. So hopefully this will be something that I can consistently weave in and out, and I'll see you next time.